morning, Karen, and welcome to our Deconstruction podcast. So the way that we always kick off the episodes is to let yourself introduce who you are and what you do. So take it away. Who is Karen?
So first and foremost, I suppose I'm a mum. Firstly, building designer by trade, wife, studying, juggling a lot of balls. Yeah, so, but with a passion after my own journey and walk to help women who need help coming out of relationships that have been domestic family violence situations. So.
Michael and I were blown away after we spoke with you and what you're doing with Dandelion Safe Homes. When did you start Dandelion, and do you want to give a little bit of a background on what it is that you're trying to achieve?
So basically, I've walked a journey on my own for at least 10 years after leaving a marriage that was not healthy. I was qualified, I just finished my qualification for building design. Growing up with my dad being a builder, watching him build many a house, was in a situation where I couldn't afford to live, basically, with 4 kids. And I knew I couldn't sustain, I had a little bit of savings, but I knew I couldn't sustain the normal way of living as such, with rental prices going up and not much support, on government payments and things, trying to take care of my kids. So I walked a journey of going out of the normal box of, Western society where you pay 40% of your income just for your rental. And I thought, this is crazy. I did a trip to India in between, which helped me reframe in that, there's 4 generations of families living in one room, literally one room. They cook, they clean, they sleep, everything in that room, because they can't afford to do anything else. And I came back to Australia and went, it made sense to me, and I thought, well, if I'm spending 40% of my income on just the roof over my head, it just seemed really crazy to me. So I thought, I was watching tiny home shows from the United States at the time, where they were a massive thing way before they were here. And I thought, well, that's a solution, let's go with that. So I designed and built my own, but I suppose coming out of that, it gave me financial freedom, but also gave me a vision to go, well, why can't other women, in my predicament or in my, my situation, if it's one less thing that stops, if they're stopping in a relationship that's abusive because of finances, it's one less excuse to stay there. So I saw a way of, planning that's one less thing, and then looking at the other issues as to why women stay in those relationships, and going, well, there has to be something done, at least to give them a choice, rather than saying, well, I have to stay in this relationship because of finances, or because, one silly thing for me was I didn't know how to mow the grass. As silly as that seems, it was just one more excuse as to why to stay. So for me, I want to build a system and I view it like one step at a time, where there's no more excuses to stay in a relationship where you're being treated, wrong and bad.
Was the becoming a designer, was that part of, can I call it, the exit strategy?
Yes. Well, not necessarily, no, it wasn't at the time. No, it was, I suppose, yes, to some degree it was, because it gave me income.
Yeah.
Before I even left my marriage, I knew it was over, a long time before that, and financially I needed to be able to provide for myself. And I could set up my own business where I could work my own hours as well, around my children. So yeah, I set up that to have an income stream. So
Probably the early seeds of thinking, how am I going to
provide
post the inevitable, if I could put it that.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And for our listeners who maybe don't know what a tiny house is, how would you kind of describe a tiny house? And then on the back of that, what I thought was stuck with me when we spoke, you were really crafty when you were building your tiny house to go where you would find your materials from.
Yeah, so I suppose the definition of a tiny house is pretty much self-explanatory in that it's small, it's compact, it has everything you need. My definition, I love camping, so you only have what you need. You only pack what is essential for that time frame, and you live more outdoors than you do in. So they're the three things that I really love about tiny homes. And as for designing it, I recycled a lot. I looked on Gumtree. A lot of my materials came from Gumtree. The structural elements were all brand new to make sure it was built very sturdily. But at the same time, I incorporated things that I love. So I've got, a mirror that belonged to my great-grandmother. I've got my grandmother's chairs that I've made into stairs, solid pine chairs. They're now my stairs. So I look at them every day and I'm like, it reminds me of my heritage and my background and just really happy memories. And in a small space, you tend to prioritise what actually gives you value rather than just filling a space with a lot of meaningless things. So that's, for me, that's my definition. But recycling a lot. I made sure that I put in the things that I really wanted, like bamboo floors from a house that was built 20 years ago. I picked them up for $200. So I've got solid bamboo floors. It's, it's quality and it's beautiful and it's inspirational to everyday living. So.
Wow. It's just, so I love that. Something that I love is that when I had heard of tiny homes before speaking to you, I hadn't really heard of them as a solution for any issues and how they could solve problems. I more heard of them from interior design, tiny homes for minimalist living, and I think it's I think it's just incredible what you're doing. So what is when you're building your program for building safe home, for the safe homes and the DV shelters on the coast? How can you explain a little bit about what you are trying to achieve, how that will work? The women coming in being able to build the tiny homes, get their certificate, that they're employed, and speak a little bit about that.
So basically our program is going to be set up in 3 stages. So retreat, rebuild and restore. Retreat is basically, if a woman's in need, a lot of women, the statistics is that they have to leave at least 8 times before they actually leave. 8 times, up to 8 times prior. Each time it gets worse, the abuse when they go back. But each time they get closer and more confident to know they can do things on their own. And it's actually, it's education around that retreat stage, is education around, who are you? What are you doing in this situation? Is this okay? Is this behaviour in a marriage or in a relationship? Is that actually normal? Because a lot of women question themselves, am I the one who's abusing? Am I the one who's causing this? There's so many questions involved in that relationship. Not to put fault on anybody, but to actually look at reality of, seeing that woman's okay or not, either way. So the retreat is giving them that time out, space to breathe, not just being consumed by survival. So if if we come across a woman who touches base with the DV centre, we can say, okay, well, we've got a space you can go, have a weekend away. If you have to say, I'm going away for a weekend with the girlfriends, whatever you need to say to have a time out, to have a retreat, to have some education around relationships and what it looks like. So that retreat stage will be having a space, with tiny home accommodation to sign, this is what a tiny house is as well. But in a bigger picture, we're going to have other DV support groups running meditations or yoga retreats or, art therapy. And then the women can come and go as many times as they need to. So that's the retreat stage, just the education and just giving them space to, to think outside of their own consuming situation, which it can be. Rebuilding is traineeships. We've linked in with other groups who provide hospitality traineeships or retail traineeships, but the main one we're going to be running is construction. So educating women in construction, it's not necessarily the path that they're going to take in their future, but it gives them an income and it gives them training, it gives them self-confidence. So the construction traineeship is also going to rebuild them as people. So they're going to build in more education as to who they are, rediscovering who they are, rediscovering their passions in life. Because that's pivotal to actually being able to walk out of an unhealthy relationship, rebuilding that self-confidence. So each week is going to be structured and framed around that as we build a tiny home. So the tiny houses are going to be built by the women, and then they can either be put into circulation in other shelters to expand their capacity, but basically we're going to be working with a whole stack of other groups as well. And then obviously the latter factor is the long-term view of having women own their own land and their own tiny home to give them long-term stability financially. So getting them into stable work after the traineeships, again, whether that's retail, hospitality or construction. My main link is in construction because that's my background. There's a group called NAWIC, which is National Women Association of Women in Construction. They've got a massive network of women in construction and they provide a lot of support around that as well. But linking in with other groups to the point where the woman can go from just having some time out of their relationship to actually walking out, gaining financial freedom, gaining an affordable roof over their heads, and long-term being able to be stable in housing. So it's a full program from start to finish where the women are supported the whole way through.
Sorry, it's just it's such a holistic response from the beginning to the end, and even from when they're going to be able to build, learn and earn at the same time, and be empowered by your program is just incredible.
Where in terms of there's a lot of moving parts there.
Yeah.
Where are you in terms of holding it all together?
So I've been building it for 6 years. So all the structures in place. We've linked in with a lot of people who are on board. As far as Tech Queensland, NAWIC, Global Sisters is another big group supporting women in business. They help do financial planning and also financial stability for women as well. We're linked in with local DB networks to provide additional support for counselling, psychology, all of that sort of thing, safety plans. We're linked in with a few shelters as well where we can actually place tiny homes legally so that we can expand that capacity to be able to house women coming out of DB. Halfway through next year, the goal is to start our first construction program, so our first traineeship. I'm currently studying to be the trainer because there's no women currently training in construction space. We're linked in with Queensland TAFE, who are 100% backing what we're doing. And essentially, we'll have our first group of possibly 10 women coming through in halfway through next year.
That's
So
awesome.
that's the goal.
That's coming up very soon.
It is,
It's
yeah.
going to be right there.
Yeah. So there's still a lot of working parts as far as, we need a factory to build. We need to have, I've linked in with a builder who's happy, a female builder who's just won a lot of awards with NAWIC and across the board, absolute winner in her building space. So she's linked in with me as well. So we're trying to keep it fairly female based, not that we're against men at all. We're not, we're completely not. We're all for healthy relationships and men who support women in that space as well. But yeah, having a factory, I'm currently applying for a government grant to possibly get a rural space as well to build an education centre. So yeah, it's a lot of working parts still and a lot of people, to jump on board and help out. So yeah.
When you said legally to keep your tiny house on land is a good link into what we were talking about in our pre-podcast chat about where you can, lots of regulation around how you can keep tiny homes on land. Do you want to share a little bit of a background of how you've been moving around with your tiny home, and there seems to be a lot of inconsistency in councils about tiny homes and proximity to the main house and how long you can be on there. I thought that your story was really interesting.
Yeah, so again, the charity is built off the back of my own journey. So I have walked a long journey. I built mine 8 years ago, just with me and another friend who was a qualified carpenter. It took us 5 weeks to build, and then I had 3 weeks to move out of my rental house. I had no idea where I was going, but I had a house.
Yeah.
So I literally hooked up to a tow truck and went to a relative's farm out in Scenic Rim. Called the Scenic Rim Council, said, this is where I'm at, this is my address, am I okay? Being here, am I legal, am I okay to stay? Scenic Rim Council basically said, look, as long as you don't get any noise complaints or smell complaints, you're fine. I was in the middle of 250 acres. Nobody could see me, let alone smell me or hear me. So me and my kids settled there. Ideally, that was where I was going to stay put. Then I had to move again because I got remarried. So we moved back closer to Brisbane, into Logan City Council. So Logan City Council eventually found me. Apparently I got dogged in the day I moved to the property because the owner had bad blood with the neighbours. It took Logan City Council a year to actually notify me that I'd been, red flagged as such. But they were brilliant. They said to me, well, you've got 6 months to move. So it took me less than 6 months to find a new place to move my tiny home. Then I went to Brisbane City Council. I was outside of their parameters where I parked. So I ended up moving into a relative's house at the time that was available. Brisbane City Council is the only one who has very clear guidelines. Logan City Council pretty much bans anybody from living in a caravan as such, long term.
Right.
So there are fairly clear regulations around most city councils now. They actually have a page normally about frequently asked questions, tiny homes. So if you go onto any council website, there's usually a really clear guideline because they are becoming more popular.
Yeah.
So essentially, but long term, what we're looking at doing with a group called Global Sisters is to actually have private land owned by up to 3 women. So our way around it is to say, okay, well, this block of land is owned by three people as a community body corp. So basically 3 tiny homes, all under one roof with one walkway, all legally above board as buildings rather than caravans, all plumbed in correctly. And so we're doing it all above board so that long term it is sustainable and in a way that council can put restraints or guidelines around it. So we're framing it in a way that council understands.
Council, but every council's
Council's
and this is
different.
one of the issues.
Yeah.
There's got to be some uniformity
That's right.
from this point of view.
It would be helpful.
There's got to be some guidance or some rules. It's all the planning stuff is up for revisiting as far as I can see right across Australia.
That's right.
So this should be part of that whole route. Some stuff has to be just mandated to councils. As these are the requirements. Unless you can substantiate otherwise, some sort of community detrimental issue. But other than that, they're okay. But you said before, I think you said you've been moved on 8 times.
8 times, yeah. I've moved my tiny house 8 times. So I've lived in Scenic Rim, Logan, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Redlands. So I've lived in at least 5 city councils. Most of the time I've moved because I've needed to, for personal reasons, for work or school or things like that. I've lived remotely, because my tiny house is completely off grid, so I can park it anywhere pretty much. I bring my own water in, it's got a solar system complete set up. But the thing I love about it is even having moved 8 times, I still live in the same house. And there's a lot of comfort in that. And that's and that ownership factor is huge. For myself, when I left my marriage, I was a single mom with 4 kids, and I own my own home. So there's a massive thing and a massive, self-confidence, I think, in women being able to purchase a home that they own.
Is moving an issue?
No, not really. It takes half a day to pack down, and then I ring the local tow truck.
That's just that simple.
Yeah.
What do you mean by pack down?
So packing down looks like disconnecting the downpipe, disconnecting all the piping underneath the house, taking the windows so they don't smash during travelling, tie down all the furniture, So, tie down the fridge and the washing machine, the heavier equipment in the house. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's
that
kind of
makes
what it looks
sense.
like. But
Yeah.
it's a lot easier than packing an entire house.
Yeah, definitely. No removalist for you.
Well, the house is the removal.
I think you said once before that I want to be the relative, but you sort of negotiate with the owners based on adjustment sort of prices.
Yes.
If they were leasing that land out for some animal use.
Yeah, that's one little trick I've found over the years of moving is to look up horse adjusting. So a lot of people, there's so many ads out there for horse adjusting, and again, being off-grid completely, I can do that. Some tiny homes require power water hookup, whereas mine doesn't. So it's a matter of calling and say, okay, well, instead of a horse for $70 a week, would you like a tiny house for $100? Obviously you've got to have access in and out and security and things like that, but most people are like, sure, I'll give it a go. So I haven't really had a lot of, I have a friend who's a real estate agent too, so he'll quite often have clients who are, oh yeah, sure, we can house somebody. So I've had kind of contacts in that area. So, I mean, even at the Tiny House Expo, I've been to the last 3 over the years, and 3 years ago, the Tiny House Expo, there was 14 tiny homes. The next one, there was about 35. This year, there was 65 tiny homes there.
Wow.
different
65.
designs.
Different designs, all different designs. Yep, some were just one-off custom builds, some were, manufactured in the factory. But the biggest question people are still asking is where can we park them? A lot of people want to live tiny, but they won't step over that line because they're unsure of what council, because councils are so, where we go, what do we do? It's very, very undetermined. So a lot of people don't cross that line, and they're still in a traditional home paying a huge mortgage or massive rent or living in cars. I met a lot of people living in cars and vans because they're defined very clearly, whereas tiny houses are not.
It just does my head in on two fronts there. That we're talking about a crisis of accommodation, and you're basically selling yourself on the same as an animal.
Where you can do it in 5 weeks. You've proven it. It's 5 weeks.
It's like for heaven's sake, we're as a society with, and there are people around who can find fault with that or try to dog you in. That's the thing that does my head. And the other thing too is the inconsistencies. I got friends who are travelling around Australia on motorhomes or anything like that. They just rock in, power up to people's sites or accommodation, all that sort of stuff. Stay for weeks. Get in, drive away. I just think, what's the difference? Really, what's the difference in terms of?
Well, up to 3 weeks is the normal council regulation. Temporary is considered up to 3 weeks. So, and being a vehicle on wheels with a motor is different than being a vehicle on a trailer. Like, you haven't got a motor attached to it, so it's not as easy to move. Even though you can call the tow truck and move. So
I recognise the differences, but it's just from just a human nature.
Right.
People don't find fault with all the sort of vans going down the coast, stopping in for weeks on end. But they can find somebody who can find fault with that. Tiny home anyway.
And so, what is the purpose of making your program 10 weeks compared to being able to spit them out in 5 weeks?
So a normal construction 1 certificate is done in about 9 weeks. So we can possibly make it up to 26 weeks, which is more realistic of what we're looking at doing. Most of the women who are coming into our program are not in a good mental health space. So we've got to allow time for them to come in and out of that program over, say, 20 weeks to 26 weeks. We want to give them space to grow, not just develop skills. So because we want it to be a long-term solution, not just, because the funding comes from the government. So we have to sit within a certain, rules of that funding. So we have to be able to provide work. They have to be stable enough to go into part-time or full-time work when they come out of this program. And again, it doesn't have to be construction, but if they're not in a good mental health space, if they don't have the ability to function, coming in and out of an unhealthy relationship also, they need to be in a position where they can actually have the resilience and skills to do that in a healthy way. I myself have been not a good mental health space and had to leave work. because I just couldn't go home every night to run a healthy relationship and then go back to work and function and meet the expectation of an employer. So we have to do the programs over a longer time frame to be able to not only give them the skills but the life skills that are included in what we're doing.
Wow. And is there a certain design that you want to do for their construction or anything that you have in mind?
Yeah, so I've designed, I want to do 5 initially, 5 different designs. They're all different lengths, so smaller is obviously cheaper, but even the smallest design has all the basics of living. So, you know, it's all self-contained, so every design is self-contained. You have everything you need, you know, shower, toilet, kitchen, in that home and a bed. So depending on the woman's needs, they can all be redesigned for each woman personally if and when they get to that stage of wanting to design their own home. But each design is different. I have my personal favourite, which I've designed on the fact that I have lived in mine for over 8 years, and you know, I've just made it beautiful. And the builder I'm working with also is passionate about making something that's not only quality but beautiful, where a woman can walk into that space and feel like it's home. It's not just something that's, you know, out of a factory, that's, you know, like big commercial buildings where it's cookie cut. You know, it doesn't have a soul to it, I suppose. I want women to be involved in that process. You know, my own home is something that I've personally chosen. I mean, my kitchen bench is a Bunnings toolbox because that's what I like. You know, I literally went and bought it from Bunnings, you know, with a timber top and stainless steel, and I love it. Like, I just love that. You know, the way you can build a tiny home, it's individual. It feels like home to me, and that's, you know, I love that aspect of it.
So you've done that, you've incorporated some of your favourite, you know, your special treasure type, you know, family things from your grandmother and things like that. Is there any unique design things that you have favour, you know, other than just, not the materials or not the, is there any design thing that you think you've learned from your experience?
Well, my design for my own tiny home was based on the fact that I was only ever going to move it twice. Didn't turn out that way at all, because I built it big because I knew it was for me and my kids. I had to build it big enough as it was a stepping stone. So my plan was build a tiny home, go out to my relatives, stay there for as many years as it took me to save up for a house deposit, and then I was going to buy a house. Rent the house out, or stay in the house and rent the tiny house out to offset my rent while I had kids. And then when the kids left, I would move to the tiny home and then I'd rent the house out. And essentially I'd be living, you know, debt-free or inexpensively with a home rented that I owned. And that was kind of my progression plan. Again, didn't turn out that way, but currently, you know, I'm remarried. We're renting a large property where we're in the main house, and my tiny house is being rented out to offset the rent. So my tiny house is still earning money, even though I'm not currently living in it. So it's, the way I see it is, you know, if women can actually save a deposit and have a tiny home, it's an asset for them moving into the future, even if they're not going to live in it long term. It's a stepping stone to being stable.
I imagine the design evolution would change if you got some uniformity about, you know, certainly about the councils, because you just said then that, you know, you built it big, but then you had to move 8 times. So that's if you know that you have got certainty about not being moved on, you can, I suppose, afford to be a bit more expensive in the build. But if you're going to be continually moved on all the time, I suppose that sort of drives the design a little bit down the other way, doesn't it? To be smaller rather than just...
No, the ones I've designed are mostly smaller than the one I live in. Mine's, I mean, in saying that, mine's only 7.5 metres long, and you know, I've got double lofts at the top. So design-wise, it's brilliant. Like, I wouldn't actually have it any bigger, even with kids. I've had, you know, 2 kids in one loft, 1 kid in the other loft, and myself and my youngest downstairs. So we've had 5 people living in that, or 6 when I was married, my husband as well. We all lived in a tiny home. It was plenty big enough. The thing is with tiny house living is you downsize everything that you don't need, and it's actually really freeing.
Plus you live outside.
And you live outside. When the kids get too noisy, it's like outside. And if they drop toys on the floor, you just throw them up in the air and they disappear into the loft. That's brilliant. So they don't put their toys up, you just throw them up into the loft. So, but design-wise, you've always got to make sure that you've got, a lot of windows for cross ventilation. I haven't got air conditioning in mine, and it does get hot, but then you move outside. Yeah. So I've got a deck that wraps around my tiny home, so that you can live in the shade outside with the breeze. And most of the places I live rurally, so you've got a beautiful, rural aspect most of the time, looking at kangaroos or cows, or a beautiful view out over the bay and city, so it depends on the good thing. You can park it rurally and have the most spectacular views, and feel like you're living a millionaire's life, really.
Yeah, the middle of that huge paddock, not near a single other person, sounds pretty nice. I'm gonna say.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Mount Cotton in the bush on 14 acres, and I loved it. As a kid growing up, building cubby houses and that. So, and obviously, being a single mum, when I built mine, I'm like, I can't afford. I couldn't ever afford to live like that. So being able to live in a tiny house out in the bush, the kids loved it. They'd get bark off the trees and build TVs, and it was a really good lifestyle, having that freedom to have space. So yeah.
I was talking to a bloke the other day, what we do is knock down an old beach shack down in Palm Beach and build a massive thing, worst thing he'd ever done in his life. It's just because he said that the simpler life was the better life. All I've done is built myself a whole lot of responsibilities associated with upkeep of the house. Whereas before it was just sweep out the bottom of the floor with a bit of sand and go to the beach. And now it's so I think it's one of those things that irrespective of where you are in society when it comes to people. I think there's a genuine stepping back into less is best.
Simplicity,
Simplicity, because it just complicates. The more gadgets you got, the more responsibilities, the more pills and pumps and all that sort of stuff. It's a nightmare. Anyway.
And that's the beauty of tiny house living. It's, my expenses were cut from $400, this is going back 8 years ago, $410 a week in rent and $50, and I paid $4 a week in water. They're my only bills that I had with housing. I had no electricity, all those other costs that come with a traditional home and living next door to people. I couldn't argue it, but it's a much better lifestyle. So
I want to know, I suppose with the resources next year, starting halfway through the year, the selection process of the women who are given the opportunity to do the program, and since we know that the tiny homes will be important for the DV shelters, which have limited capacity, bringing on new women now as it is, how your future planning to be able to give more women the opportunity to do it, and how you kind of juggling that challenge?
I think the initial stage, obviously when it starts, it's going, I think the demand is huge. It's absolutely huge. And the program can be duplicated elsewhere. Our charity is set up as a company, so we can go Australia-wide, potentially worldwide if need be. But basically, once we have a pilot program set up and running, to show the government or whoever needs to see that it actually works as a long-term solution, it can be transportable. So linking, and again, I like to link in with existing charities who are already providing the services, because I know I have to stay in my lane as far as, my specialty is, designing and building the tiny homes. I link in with other networks who are already established to provide counselling and support, around mental health and safety plans. They're already doing it, so I'm not going to recreate the wheel.
Yeah.
So really anywhere that there's a network already established. So Toowoomba's a good example. They have a lot of networks that are linked together really well. So I'd like to learn from their management plan of having all the DV services linked in together. There's no point having all these isolated groups doing things, whereas if we can all link in together and refer to each other and, provide women, women call from outside your area, so you need need to have people to refer them through to. So
is there a need for, I could be wrong here, is there a need to keep the locations of the shelters, not publicly owned?
yes, yeah, definitely, yeah. There's a need for that for sure. A lot of safety issues are involved with housing women, and particularly if they're coming out of a situation where it is, coercive control or, violence or, anything that, involves the safety of women. There's definitely a need to keep that shelter hidden to some degree. So there will be women coming in from all different walks of life. Some women are just in a situation where they can, they're in a relationship that's unhealthy and their mental health is suffering. There's not necessarily a need there to have, complete isolation from that relationship or that person. We're also wanting to have programs for the men. A lot of men are in a position where they're under a lot of stress, and that comes out in relationships as well. So there's a group called Men's Line. They support men who are wanting to make changes and who are wanting to have that relationship in a better place. We're supporting women because that's based on my journey and what I've walked. But there's a lot of relationships out there who just need help, and sometimes that's stepping back from that relationship, getting help individually, and then being able to come back together. I've seen women from all sorts of situations where they've come bruised head to toe, and yet walked back into that relationship.
Sure.
Yeah, literally walking down the street with bags, bruised head to toe. I've housed
but eventually found a way back. Yeah. Because the man went on a journey.
It's just not, that one wasn't particularly a good relationship to go back into, but again, it's if we can provide support for both. It's not my particular charity's mission to support the man in this situation, but in saying that if they're willing to get assistance, there are groups out there that help in that relational situation. So
it's complicated.
It's very complicated, but I think with the women coming in, and as far as being able to which women are coming in and who's going to be in the program, we're working again with other DV groups who we've already been contacted by a group, Busy Ability, they already have a group who've come through a program. Coming from a DB background, who they said, they're in a really good position to be able to go through this program. Yeah. So we've already got a cohort of women who are ready mentally to be able to take on something like this. But I think I can see it, becoming bigger and bigger. Yeah. So, but with the support of Queensland TAFE, we can also run programs through TAFE, which is a massive network. With the support of multiple different groups. We can build the program to be, fairly big. So.
These poor people are so broken in many instances, aren't they? Yeah. So it's a matter of trying to give every part of financial assistance, just livability assistance, if I can call that.
Yeah.
Functioning, mental health.
Yeah. You've got this just incredible program that you've built, and an incredible support network of partners that you already have. I suppose my final question for the podcast episode would be if there's anyone else that you would call to come and join and support the program, if there's any missing parts or just generally that could help.
So I'd love to have builders jump on board to provide materials, or even I could see big companies out there saying, okay, well, we build houses, massive houses on a daily basis, we'd like to build you a tiny home. And they label it after their own brand, to say, okay, well, this is a Coral Homes tiny home that we've donated on behalf for your charity. Having big builders who have offcuts of materials. I live in an estate where now, at the moment, where I see skip bins absolutely full of materials. Yeah. Brand new in the skipping. Offcuts of roofers. They've cut off bits and pieces that we could use for a tiny home because a tiny home's small. Tiles. That you could use in a floor, like on a bathroom floor in a tiny home, because it's small. Recycled materials from builders. Get the good stuff, give it to us. We can build tiny homes from it. And like I said, if the big builders can afford a tiny home doesn't cost a lot to build for a builder because they're getting everything at wholesale. Build us a tiny home, donate it to our charity so we can support women.
Particularly there's a massive take up of prefab, so that feeds into that whole ability to construct more on a manufacturing basis as opposed to on-site stuff. So Emily asked Jackson, it was a cracker, a final question last time. I'm going to ask of you because I'm older. What do you do to look after yourself? How do you look after yourself?
My answer to that is run and pray, both. So I've run all my life. In primary school, I used to do cross-country running. That's a really good mental health space for me. So I run twice a week. My mental health, if I don't run, my mental health suffers. I have to keep myself physically fit, and it helps me process. So I've got my dog, I've got a border collie who I run with, and that keeps me in a good space. And I also pray because I know that this vision of what I'm looking at doing is much bigger than what I could ever achieve on my own. So I'm constantly asked for God's help. Otherwise, I would be under the bus. There's no way I could carry what I feel that this is what God's calling me to. Essentially,
Fantastic answer.
You're an amazing woman, and you just take our breath away. The work that you're doing is just phenomenal. So thank you for taking your time to talk to us, and we cannot wait to be able to share.
We'll do some special stuff for this one.
Yeah.
Make sure lots of people see it. We'll see.
Thank you.
See what we can do with half an hour culture.
Thank you. Wonderful.
All the best.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the podcast today. The information we discussed today was just that, information only. It is not specific advice. If you take action following something you heard today, it is important to make sure you get professional advice about your unique situation before you proceed, whether that advice be legal, financial, accounting, medical or other advice. Please reach out to the Helix team if you have any questions or if there's another topic you'd like to explore. And if you know someone who might benefit from the show, remember to tell them about it or point them to our Instagram, Facebook or LinkedIn.